I kind of can't believe I'm standing on this stage right now, not just because it's an honor to be sharing space with so many folks who do so much to improve the world, but because I thought that I would be dead right now. This talk is about three things. It's about recognizing what makes you feel vulnerable. It's about trying to accommodate around it, to remove limitations for yourself. And then finally, it's about what to do when that's not possible. So these are pictures of me and my sister, I'm the older one, from when I was around 11 years old. That's when I was diagnosed with epilepsy. My parents, and my mom is here, made a commitment early on in my life that I should have as few restrictions as possible. They found ways to work around my needs. For example, sleep deprivation would trigger a seizure for me, so instead of spending the night at a sleepover, my dad would pick me up at midnight. It was dangerous for me to lock the bathroom door in case I fell and I had a seizure, so they made sure to always knock. However, the outside world was sometimes not always so accommodating. When I was in the 6th grade, the school nurse told me that she was nervous about me attending a class trip and that I shouldn't go. When I told my parents, my dad took the day off of work and attended as a chaperone. I recognize that there is privilege inherent in him being able to make that choice, but also there was an unwillingness to allow no to be an answer for me in life. The philosophy of not being willing to take no as an answer is what got me my first job out of college. It's what got me in off the wait list to NYU Law, which is just down the street. And it's what emboldened me to come up with the idea for the resistance manual. In November, I realized that as a law student, I had the knowledge to understand the policies that were being proposed. I also had the time to sift through the ton of information that was coming out. I started tracking these policies in a spreadsheet, and I ultimately shared them with people who could connect me to technologists to bring the site that you see behind me. I wanted to use the privilege of my education and the access that it provides to make sure as many people as possible could understand what their government is doing and how it would impact them, and also what they could do to support or change what was being proposed. It's why I set a standard of writing content at a 5th grade reading level. 20 to 30% of Americans can't read above that. It's why I make sure that we present pathways to engagement that are accessible to different types of people. So there's calling, there's internet engagement, there are lots of different ways to engage. A few days after we launched, I was presented with 300 volunteers to coordinate through Slack. I had no background in organizing. I only recently read Becky Bond's book, Who Spoke Yesterday, and I was excited to find out that I was using her organizing philosophy, but at the time, I didn't know that. What I was using was really being guided by my epilepsy. I wanted to make sure that we were being inclusive and allowing as many volunteers to participate, regardless of their disability, limitations on time, or any other type of constraint. So I created a frequent contributor form a couple months ago for people to fill out as part of their onboarding when they were reading our principles and guidelines, which I developed with our volunteers. As you can see, we ask people how much time they have to contribute, if they'll be able to let us know when they're not available. And I ask because when my seizures were poorly controlled, I was not always able to let people know when I wasn't available. I wanted to have clarity about what to accept from people at the outset. We have innovated on this more recently by creating a calendar people sign up for, shifts or office hours. In this way, we are able to both be flexible and inclusive while still having accountability. It's the kind of work environment I would have thrived in when my epilepsy made my life more unpredictable. The model I've built made it so that people don't have to ask for accommodations, and of course, we're trying to be responsive when people are requesting for additional accommodations so that they can still participate in the work. But what about that third category of stuff that you can't find workarounds for? As I became an adult with epilepsy, I realized that there are things that I carried with me that I couldn't find workarounds for. I have a constant awareness of death because I might be hurt or suffocate during a seizure. I feel that often it's unfair that I have to have this mental burden of taking medicine multiple times a day. And I also feel limited socially because my body punishes me for drinking alcohol in the form of a seizure. So I did what I do when I have problems. I read a book. A few years ago, I read David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell, and I realized that while there are things that I can't control, I can control the way that I hold them and that I think about them. I can choose to think about the things I just mentioned as limitations, or I can hold them as my strengths. I can choose to hold the constant awareness of death as freedom from expectations. I'm living in overtime, so I can do whatever the hell I want to do. I can choose to embrace taking medicine 3 times a day because it's made me disciplined, and I have to be self-aware and honest with myself about how late I'm really going to be out to make sure that I have my next dose with me. And I can be happy about the fact that I have saved a lot of embarrassment, including at conferences like these, because I can't drink. So, it's also why in law school I co-founded the Disability Allied Law Students Association at NYU, so I could hold space for people like me who didn't always feel included in the events that the school facilitates. This approach of making intentional choices about how to hold a vulnerability has made my epilepsy feel like a gift instead of a burden. It's why I prioritize self-care for myself and in leading a team of volunteers. It's why I make sure that I tell the frequent contributors working on the manual that they don't need to track all the political news, just the specific area that they're working on. I ask people who haven't taken time off if they'd like to do so, even knowing that sometimes when people step away from the work, they don't come back. And it's why I told our summer intern just recently, when she got caught up in the typo scandal from Donald Trump, not to cede any more mental space than was necessary to the work we were doing. It's also why, at the suggestion of our disability rights team lead, that I created a channel in our Resistance Manual Slack team for self-care. It's why I host a podcast called Self-Care Sundays. They're both spaces where I try to ask folks to share their journey and their challenges with self-care, learn how people establish boundaries, and just talk about how privilege also factors into the way we think about self-care. It's a way for us to institutionalize practices that allow us to sustain the work. My epilepsy has given me a lot more than it's taken away. So I believe that in spaces like PDF, when we talk about progress and solutions and advancement, we need to make sure that we're not removing differences and identities that have value. Progress should seek to improve people's quality of life and not just exist for its own sake. And certainly not for fixing what we perceive to be problems in others. I believe that we must always ask, what do the people I'm trying to help need or want? People are experts on their own lives. I don't want to be cured of my epilepsy. Many people I know within the disability community are not looking to have their disability taken away. They're looking for the world to be less hostile and more welcoming to them. I think this is true not just of disability, but for all types of identities that we hold dear to who we are. I think most people would prefer a country that gives them what they need as opposed to being pitied and then ignored. Most people I know don't need to be fixed because we're not broken. So I like to finish up walking you through the thought process I just described at the beginning. What's something that feels like a vulnerability or weakness to you? You have it? And then think about if it's something that you can change or accommodate around so it doesn't feel limiting to you. And if not, can you think about how to hold it in such a way so it feels like a strength? What are the unique perspectives it gives you? And how have you learned to move through the world as a result of that challenge? The goal is not to ignore the real challenges we face in the world, but rather to make ourselves resilient and feel strong so that we don't internalize limitations that others perceive. The beauty of this approach is that when you can do it for yourself, you can see the vulnerabilities in others more clearly. Even better, you can go back to your families, your communities, and your work and share these learnings about how to hold your vulnerabilities and weaknesses in a way so they don't feel like weights or limits. You get to decide if you live your life terrified of being in debt or carefree because no one will sue you because you're not worth it, from what we heard yesterday. You get to decide if you're scared of wearing religious attire or proud that you embody the freedom that this country stands for. And you can hold those vulnerabilities as strengths while you work to change the world so that no one ever has to feel like pieces of who they are limitations or make them weak. And I hope that you do.